Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Business Insights room. Every Thursday, Tim Sullivan and I, Maya Matsuoka, lead a discussion looking for insights, developments, and new challenges for the business in Japan. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. Today, we are pleased to welcome Ulrike Schaede, Professor of Japanese Business, Director of Japan Forum for Innovation and Technology at the San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy in San Diego, California. Our theme is corporate governance and the dangers of financialization. We will open the discussion after Ulrike goes through the challenges, advantages, and disadvantages created by financialization in Japan and the US. So Ulrike, let's go.
So thank you for joining. And so what I'd like to do today is sort of sort my comments around three topics, namely, A, what is financialization? What do I mean by that? 2, why is it dangerous? And 3, how is it connected to corporate governance? The reason it's a topic now is that it ties into a lot of the things that ail the United States, the rise in popularism, the rise in inequality and poverty, and a lot of people have begun to blame some of the ways in which finance is ruling U.S. business, and that's really at the core of the matter. So let me go into these 3 steps, and feel free to interrupt me if something's not quite clear, and then I'll hope to leave enough time for discussion, as I'd be very interested in hearing from you as well. So the word financialization has long been used for a very simple thing, which is a shift of a country's economic activity from the primary sector which is agriculture and so forth, to the secondary sector, which is manufacturing, into the third sector, which is services, including banking, and so forth. But that's not what I mean here. What I mean with financialization is this new phenomenon that our daily lives, or let me say, a phenomenon whereby daily life decision-making is driven mostly by money. And this is a new theme in the United States. There are lots of books coming out on this. The first, I remember, was Jerry Davis, who wrote about this, as a sociologist from University of Michigan, who wrote about this about 20 years ago. And what he observed was that it used to be that we would buy a house in order to become a member of a neighborhood or a community. Or we would make friends because we like people. Or we would work because we wanted to be part of an organization. But lately, these decisions are often, even in language, in the English language, are often made based on some sort of return on investment. So when Americans buy houses today, they speak about how much it will appreciate in value over the next 10 years. And then when it has, presumably they'll sell it and buy another one. When Americans talk about friendships, increasingly, I hear people say, I've invested a lot in our relationship, as if, there was a return on investment of friendship that you could somehow measure. There is a book out by a journalist, blocking on the first name, the last name is Lehman, and it's called The Transaction Man, where all activities, it used to be an organization man would be a lifetime employee of a large company like IBM, or General Motors, or Maytag, or Westinghouse. And the argument of that book is that we've all become transaction people. where everything is a transaction, where everything has a value that we can translate or assess in some sort of dollar sense, right? So that's financialization. And why is this dangerous? Well, it's dangerous because, at least I believe, in the first instance, because not everything can be measured in money, like human well-being or friendships or, even the returns to altruism or the returns to being friendly to somebody else. And so a lot of what we talk about utility and what makes our life good is based on U.S. economists' idea of what makes people tick, and clearly let me just stipulate for discussion, it's more than money. Right? But the larger danger of financialization is the short-termism that's attached to it. That if you want to think about return on investments, you buy a house, you think about how much will it appreciate in value for the next 3 years, not the next 300 years, because you would want to these benefits to accrue to yourself. So there's an inherent short-termism in this trend towards financialization. All right, so then how does this connect to corporate governance? Well, it may already be clear, but let me just give you my version of that. And begins with the obvious question, what actually is corporate governance? And for reasons that are interesting, and I can explain later if you care, the United States definition of corporate governance has been grounded in a 1985 paper by Michael Jensen and his colleague Meckling, who framed it in rational choice and principal agency theory. And the basic assumption, again, is an economist's assumption of what makes people tick. And so the Jensen-Meckling theory of corporate governance begins with the stipulation that managers are evil and owners are good. And managers are evil because managers are evil, with evil what is meant is self-interested. They're only there for their own self-interest. They want to get as rich as possible. And owners who own the assets of the company are at an informational asymmetry and therefore need to be protected from the evil self-interest pursuit of the manager. And if you buy that logic that people are evil, then the Jensen-Meckling model will work for you, because now what you need is a board of directors that monitors the manager and makes sure that they don't buy 10 corporate jets and 2-inch thick carpets or golden leafed waste paper baskets. And so the board of directors function of corporate governance in this Jensen-Meckling view is they are there to monitor the manager and reprimand them or fire them if they operate against the interest of the owners, which is defined as, you guessed it, making high returns on investment. So that has become the U.S. view of corporate governance, where the ultimate goal is to maximize shareholder value. And by the way, one of the problems that we have increasingly is the owners and shareholders are no longer the same thing, right? So owners are people that actually have a real stake in a company and really care, and they're in it for the long run. There might be founders, they might have a large portion. But nowadays, shareholders, and you think about it for a moment, maybe you think of yourself as a shareholder, but you may actually have your money in some sort of fund, or, so you've delegated the investment already to somebody else. Or even if you own shares directly, you might actually be in there trading them quite a bit. So shareholders are not owners. They don't have a long-term view of what matters to the company. They want a return on investment because of the financialization, and they're pretty short-term. Okay, so So what's interesting now, how does this relate to Japan? I've been talking about the US so far, but Japan is interesting because I'd like to think about corporate governance systems around the world as falling on a spectrum between shareholder maximization and stakeholder maximization. So on the one hand, you have this market-driven return on investment, ROE, profits, the Wall Street type of corporate governance. And then on the far other end of the spectrum is sort of Japan as a model of stakeholder capitalism where for reasons that are interesting historically, the shareholders were only one of many interested parties to the operation of the company. And one of the reasons that came up is because of the cross shareholdings in the old days, where the shareholders were also trading partners or friends of the family or people in the same business group. So in Japan, the shareholders were also had other interests in the organization. But let's leave that out for a moment. We can come back to history if you care. But so the Japanese stakeholder view of the old is that the most important assets of the company are employees who are lifetimers, so they have a long-term concern about the organization, and trading partners, including, of course, the subcontractors and the huge network of suppliers, and they have a keen interest in the longevity of the organization. And then there are the founders and so forth, and the business group people and the main bank, and also the shareholders. And some of these had overlapping functions. So what's interesting at this particular moment in time, at the year 2021, what we're seeing is that the United States is having a sort of a wake-up call on its system of capitalism. And there are all these voices that say, maybe this maximizing shareholder value view, MSV, is actually wrong. Because the shareholders are a very small group of people, and by the way, the entire model of the manager is evil, and therefore the owners have to be protected from the evil manager, are wrong anyway. At the same time, just as the United States is saying, hey guys, we have to review this, just at that moment, Japan is saying there's clearly something wrong with our model. And what's wrong with our model is that there's too much slack in the system. There's not enough incentives for CEOs to actually give it their best. They can kick the can down the road with impunity. They don't have to, keep the house in order. Stuff is building up in the garage, if you say. Nobody's cleaning out the garage. This has led to inefficiencies. The company's not doing well. We need some more pressure on our CEOs in Japan to get that together. And this insight started when Carlos Ghosn arrived, funnily, even though later he did some things that we could disagree with. The initial Ghosn shock was that he said, let's just clean up the auto industry. Let's clean up Nissan's subcontractors, and let's get rid of all of these inefficiencies. And that worked well. And then other companies said, oh, okay, fine. So we have to do something. So if you back to the spectrum, so you have the MSV, maximum shareholder value, on the one end, where the United States is saying, that's pretty excessive. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have Japan, and then Japanese are saying, well, that's pretty excessive. That's too much. This touchy-feely type of governance with internal directors no longer working. So both of these prototypes of governance systems are moving closer to each other. And what's interesting to me at this moment in time is all the criticism that Japan is still getting. It's not doing enough. There are not enough outside directors. And I'm going to phrase this a little bit provocatively so that I can get you all, get your juices flowing and you can join the discussion. But I actually think that the critics of of Japan's emerging system are wrong. Most of the critics are from the United States, and they say, there should be more outside directors, and there should be more of this and more of that. But the reality, of course, is that the world is looking at the United States, and there are lots of people, not only in Japan, but also Europe, that say, no, we do not want to become like the United States. We want to carve out our own ways. We want to find our own niche of how to build a really nice corporate governance system. And we want to rein in the market for corporate control. We don't like these hagetaka, the vultures, the Germans call them the Heuschrecken, blocking on the English word for it, actually. So the hagetaka, we don't want them. So let's rein in the market for corporate control. Let's allow the CEO to make decisions, but let's get the CEO a little bit more concerned about ROE and stock price and that sort of thing. And that's what the Japanese corporate governance reform is about. It's not about becoming like the United States. And therefore, the Americans who criticize the Japanese governance reforms, it's kind of interesting. They have a benchmark that actually nobody in Japan is even interested in reaching. So let me stop there, because I've opened a ton of different cans of worms. One is on what's important in our lives. One is how should we assess corporate governance reform, and then the third is this whole larger framework of what's corporate governance even about. And then I'll end on this, my insight, that the really big difference between Japanese and US corporate governance has long been that in the 1960s and 1970s, 1975, Jensen and Meckling started talking about this, principal agent theory, and how the self-interested CEO is dangerous, and the owners have to be protected from the CEO. At that time, the Japanese were saying, we don't understand this. It's the opposite. The market is evil. The market is short-term. The market does a lot of bad things to a company. Therefore, our CEOs have to be protected from the market. And so they built their own corporate governance system out of that. And that is what is being unraveled right now in Japan. And I find it super interesting to watch that process. So let me stop here. I've talked a lot, and see what people have to say.
Thank you. This was a brief and yet exhaustive explanation. And thank you very much for it. And I think that to the last point which you made, just before you summarized once again the three major points which you were talking about, it's about the culture eventually. So the different cultures in Japan and United States. And when I say culture, it comes down to corporate culture, but also it comes to traditions in the society and how people value longevity of relationships and also of traditions. So it's really interesting. And I know that probably for many people, putting culture and corporate governance together sounds like a far-fetched idea. But it just was a thought which occurred to me when you were talking about these things. And of course, in the beginning, you started with, the idea that when you actually buy a house, some people buy it, as an investment. Others just want to invest in the long term by building a community, and the community in that area where the house is. Yeah, so I invite everybody who is in the audience to come up on stage. And if you have comments, ideas, also questions to Ulrike, please join the conversation. We'll be happy to have you here with us in the speak.
Could I just say something about the culture, because I'm not sure this has something. We've talked about culture here before. My definition is a pretty academic one, which is culture is the norms of behavior of a group of people.
Yes,
and that can change over time. But the thing is, the United States used to be like that, right? We used to have an organization man in the United States, which is the exact equivalent to Japan's salaryman.
Okay.
We used to have lifetime employment. IBM would not lay off people in the old days. We used to have people buy houses to form communities who would then get active in the parents' association to make sure that the schools were run well. We used to have commitment to these things. And what's so interesting is why that has gone away in the United States more than elsewhere. It is going away in Japan, by the way. I hasten to say that I know a lot of people, especially sort of the young top talent, that says they're done with the salaryman system. They want to get promoted fast and they want to get rich. And so that is not, it's more about the horizon that people have and how they are incentivized by the system to uphold that view. So, for instance, the United States' biggest problem, I think, in regard to this short-termism, is when our pensions went away. In a system, and these are all systems, right? Systems of capitalism. There's a whole research thing about systems of capitalism, and there's the big differentiation that's made is market-driven systems of capitalism and relationship-driven systems of capitalism. So Germany, Japan, a bunch of other places would be the latter, and then the market-driven ones would be like the United States, the Anglo-Saxon system. And when in the United States, when the pensions were disassociated from the employer and were assigned to individuals to invest themselves, which would then also free the employer from any obligation to take care of the finances of their retiring workforce. That happened around 1990. I think that's when the organization men ended and the transaction men started. And so I don't just think it's culture and tradition and it's part of the social contract of what taxpayers want and what they demand from the government and what the government outsources to companies and so forth. So that's a whole nother episode, though, because the systems of capitalism stuff is actually really, really interesting.
Yes, okay. Well, I see your point. Just one thing a point I want to make is that you said, that systems incentivize people, but at the same time, those systems are created by people and they're maintained.
Exactly.
Yes, maintained by people. So it's really I guess that on this point we need to agree to disagree to a certain extent, but yeah, it's interesting really I believe
but you just explained how culture can change, right?
Yes.
That's because the incentive systems are set by people, they can't change over time, right? And so then becomes a question of, okay, so why is Japan still valuing and making trade-offs around the governance of their companies that value longevity? Whereas the United States people are making trade-offs around the governance of their companies that benefit the few that are already rich and work on Wall Street and that sort of thing. So that's an interesting question.
It is indeed. And I also wonder, what forces actually brought those changes to the United States. And I believe that in the case of Japan, I don't say that we have to blame globalization, because blaming is not a good expression, blame. But at the same time, as the country opens and welcomes more people from overseas, obviously, the influences begin to show. And they actually start to transform, the corporate world here, the governance as well, and the society at the end of the day. Yes, but you may have a different take on this.
No, I think globalization was a huge push there, because basically the old social contract was that the government would help the companies grow. The companies would say, okay, we take care of corporate welfare in Japan, right? And the workers said, okay, fine, we're going to be lifetime employees, but we give up our right to decide what our career is going to look like or where we're going to work. And that ended with globalization. When competition got global and companies had to please foreign investors, being a provider of corporate welfare just got way too expensive, and the ROEs were so low, and there was this criticism that Japanese companies are not profitable enough. And so a process began by which, the question is now, how can we make our CEOs more incentivize or pay more attention to the stock price and ROE and efficiency and so forth. And so that's where this whole corporate governance reform came from, this realization that in a global world, and this is actually the dangerous part of financialization. In a global world, the financialization guys will win because short-termism will win over long-term investments, and that's the real danger, right? That's why this is dangerous, because this this inherent short-termism of U.S. capitalism is seen in many places in the world as not good for companies, and therefore also not good for society.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would say that it's not only in corporate governance, these trends are observed in politics as well, in also other areas of social life. But I have a question to you. So you said, that short-termism is really the real danger. And so in your article, you say that, well, it happens because a lot of companies actually they focus on value extraction. And you argue that the opposite of that, actually, the way to fight the value extraction, and short-termism is value creation. And I wonder, what do you mean by value creation by companies? So what does it mean for corporate?
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you.
So on.
So this is the terminology that I'm using there. Actually, was coined by William Lazanick, who is a economist at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell. He has written a book called Predatory Value Extraction, and this is not so much about governance per se, but it builds on this. And so what he is observing, or has observed for the United States over the last 10 years, that even so for large corporations from Apple to Tesla to you name it, Google, any of your BMW, any of your favorite big brands, If you look at their financial decision making over the last 10 years or so, and Bill would have the precise data, what you find is that the majority of these companies have paid out more money to their shareholders than they earned. In particular, Apple is a case in point. So Apple has, over the last 10 years or so, paid out 150% of their earnings. In one form is dividends, and the other is stock buybacks. In the meantime, wages have actually not risen. So Bill saw that for Apple, so he did it for a large number of U.S. companies. And what you can see is that wages have been pretty much stagnant, or at least have not increased by anything notable on a chart, visually notable. And in the meantime, stock buybacks have multiplied. So what is a stock buyback? A stock buyback is, of course, when a company goes and it takes its retained earnings, so the money it's made in the year, and buys back its own shares, which will, of course, increase the demand for these shares and therefore increase the share price. So it is a financial engineering move to increase the stock price. Now, why would the CEO of Apple want to do that? Because 90% of his salary is in stock. So he is incentivized. So he makes a salary, but he gets all of these stock options, and he has all of these stock options, and they're vested at a certain price. So the CEO is actually in cahoots with the the Hagetaka, the vultures, who do these moves, right? And they've arrived in Japan. Some of you may have followed in 2015 Daniel Loeb, who is the guy who runs Third Point, which is a hedge fund. Decided that Sony and Fanuc were both poorly managed. The play is a very simple play. These investors, like in this case, Mr. Loeb and Third Point, arrived in Japan. They bought something like 4% of Sony and Fanuc, respectively. And that was enough for them. It was a sizable share, several $1 billion of investment. They then, Mr. Loeb wrote a very nasty letter to the CEO, basically saying, hey, you're stupid, you're doing it all wrong. You have to do this and this and this. And if not, I will take the company over. So basically, and so what did he want these companies to do? A, increase your dividends, and B, buy your share back. And of course, we all know a Japanese company sits on a lot of cash, so that makes them very attractive for these moves. So both of these companies actually did buy back their own shares until it reached a certain, wonderfully high level. 6 months later, Mr. Loeb sells the shares, sells his several $1 billion, makes a 25% gain in 6 months on an investment of $5 billion. That's really handsome, thank you kindly, and leaves. Okay? So he's just extracted value, but he's done absolutely nothing. Because if you think about it from the perspective of the company, whether that's Fanuc or Sony or wherever this is happening in the United States, what just happened? What happened is that an outside investor who doesn't care about the company whatsoever bought a sizable share. 5% is actually sizable on these large companies, right? Bought a sizable share of this organization, didn't give a hoot about productivity or efficiency or business model or employees or anything like that. All they want is for the company to take their hard-earned cash and not invest it in innovation or higher wages or training of their people so that they get ready for the DX and all of that. No, all these guys wanted was for the company to take the hard-earned cash, buy back their own stock so that the stock price increases. When it is at the nice and high level, they leave. All they've done is they've taken money out of the company and then arrivederci. So the value extraction comes in through this mechanism whereby a company is deprived of its ability to reinvest in itself. So usually a company should take the money it earns and innovate, R&D centers, train their people, make a nicer building, give people a better lunch, whatever, and reinvest in itself, attract new talent, and then make even more money the next period. But these value extractors come in and they say, that's all not good, right? That's all only pays out in like 10 years from now, so we don't care about this. We want a rapid return in 6 months, so give us the money. And indeed, the best way to get rid of these guys is to give them what they want, and then they disappear. And that's the value extraction that has over the last 20 years undermined U.S. companies in corporate America.
And the Japanese companies who sit on mountains of cash are in danger because of such guys, right?
Yeah, they're tasty, right? Tasty.
Yes.
It's just like let's stick our hand in the cookie jar, and there's lots to be had, and this will go real fast. 4 months and we're out of here.
Yeah, lots of
So
earnings. I just wonder, because of course it ties to corporate governance to a certain extent, but there must be other ways, to prevent it. And I wonder whether it is legislation, because I'm not really well versed in this field, not yet at least, but I wonder whether such, voucher capitalists or voucher investors, if they use gaps gaps in legislation so that they can do what they are doing actually.
So
Because we all
there are
know
certain.
that this is not the right thing to do in terms of.
Well, the United States allowed stock buybacks in 1992 or something like that. And in fact, Professor Lasnik is walking around town saying, we got to disallow this. And so you're right. So laws would be one way to stop it, right? So you disallow stock buybacks and disallow dividend payouts beyond a certain limit or something, right? It would be one way. But since the U.S. is pretty much run by Wall Street, the legislative change is difficult to come by in this regard. And so that's definitely something. The Japan allowed stock buybacks also in the 1990s. So this is now possible in Japan. And indeed, if you look at the data, stock buybacks are on the rise. So this is now done in Japan as well. So if you can't use the law, which some people still want to try in Japan, what you can do is ostracism, right? So this is the old Japanese way. The old Japanese way was to say, hey, these are all cross-held shares, and you can't buy us. You can't, because the other shareholders won't sell. That went away in 2006 when the government introduced a squeeze-out rule, which means that if some raider has a certain amount of shares amassed, then minority shareholders have to surrender their shares. So that protection is gone too. And then the third way to protect is what just happened in the Toshiba case, where there's some sort of intervention. This intervention, by the way, goes back. The United States started this under President Trump 3 years ago, with a law that disallows sort of investments in U.S. technologies. And so back to your suggestion, let's write a law to disallow this. But that only works for certain technologies or certain investments or that sort of thing. So it's difficult, right? So the old Japanese governance system protected against this. The recent reform in Japan have opened up this avenue to investors who are driven by short-term investment goals. And and at one level, as I said earlier, it's not all bad, right? It's not all bad in the sense that where there was too much slack in Japanese companies, there is now more discipline from the market, because the best defense against a raider is always to run a great company. If you run a great company, then a raider has nothing to clean out. Right? So the best defense is to be a great manager. And that's exactly what the corporate governance reforms in Japan are supposed to bring about, better management, right? But where do you draw the line? And Maya, that's exactly your point. Right? So where do you draw the line where you say, yeah, we want the discipline of the market, but no, we don't want to fall prey to these rapacious investors. That don't care about communities and workers and innovation and so forth and so on.
Indeed. And it looks to me, well, at least in the past several years, that there is, well, with the pace at which changes happen in every single aspect of society and also the corporate world, it's very easy for, companies to sway from one extreme to another. And Japan has actually avoided that. They have managed to keep somehow, a steady pace without swaying too much. But it's really a kind of scary thinking about how much, the country and its corporate world can change if they really give way to those, let's say, the trends which damage actually the. What's that? Damage
but the longevity, right?
Yeah,
the threat
indeed,
to the
yes,
longevity of the company.
of companies.
And well, and there are lots of people within Japan that want
Yes,
more short-termism. They think that these old companies are all duds, which is ridiculous, right? Because old companies have great assets and experience and asset knowledge. They just need to be managed well. And what Japan is suffering from is a large number of old companies that are managed poorly. But the problem is not the age. The problem is that they're managed poorly. Right? And so how can we give managers a kick in the derriere so that they do a little bit more? And, and so that's what the governance reform is about. And a lot of people are excited about this. And they're right. And I'm excited with them. I like the kind of companies that do that are managed really well. I write about them. But again, so as you pointed out, so where do you draw the line? Where do you say, okay, so this is a good discipline and this is bad discipline? And that's really impossible to say.
Indeed. And what pace is good, actually, the speed of change,
yeah,
and so on. Because we all know that there are quite a lot of things which Japan really needs to change. But at the same time, there are quite other good things which we don't have to worry about, and it's better to preserve them. But yeah, it's really, and I think it's also it is obvious, in recruiting, the recruiting business as well. I can see that Sam is here, or no? Did he leave? Oh, Sam, yes. So I have followed some of your posts, on LinkedIn, and I can see that probably you have something to add, about this. If you feel like, please feel free to join us. And everybody who is in, yes, Sam, okay. I hope. Okay. Hi, hello, Sam. I just wondered, whether or what your perspective on this is, on the topic.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. I definitely have some thoughts. So thanks for calling me up here. It's really, really interesting talk so far. So thank you for setting this up and everyone. Yeah, so I'm American, so I'm gonna make some. I'll try not to make too many classic American points. But yeah, I guess I see. I don't need to rehash. I think anybody who's been in Japan for a while has heard the kind of pressure from the American people a million times. But I do wonder, like, what is the if the problem really does come down to management, as you were just saying, which I think I agree with, that still the sort of long-term incentive scheme doesn't really put any pressure to kind of move. I guess to kind of tie what I'm trying to say into kind of the recruitment angle, which is what I work in, and mostly what I do is I help foreign companies to hire here in Japan, mostly in tech, and I've seen that do a lot of good for many people, because what they had before was basically no choice in where they worked, no ability to move up the ladder. And sort of earlier, I heard you say that, the problem with the American system is that it, keeps the rich getting richer. And I just kind of feel that in Japan, there's this sort of other way that happens, which is not necessarily better, that things don't move and people don't really move up. And I've seen, people there's not really a lot of options in terms of, leaving your company, right? And so it does create this class of people like you're talking about that are working in these gaishke foreign firms. And they're saying, yeah, let's move faster. Let's do the way that they're governing these things overseas because we want to make some money here. And yeah, I mean, I growing up in the States, there's, I have reasons for being an expat as well. So it's certainly not a perfect country. But yeah, I see the need for reform is quite strong among the labor pool as well. I think it really drives flexibility and freedom.
So first of all, it is changing, right? For the top tier talent already, tenshoku is the new word, and it's a reality. So things are changing a little bit, but at the top level. So here is the challenge that America is facing, and then there's an equivalent challenge, as you point out, right? It's a trade-off, right? So what are the trade-offs really? The challenge in America, as I see it right now, is that we have systematically neglected the middle class. So what is the middle class? The middle class is people that work in steady jobs, maybe subcontractors that feed into the large guys, people that work for those people, right? The stereotypical family that can count on having a solid income for the next 20 years, which allows them to take out a mortgage and build a house and build roots and build communities. And they're not rich, they're not poor, they're quite comfortable with what they have. And they may not be rocket scientists, they may not hold PhDs, they're not stupid either. They find a place in a society where, there's some sort of predictability and stability. And the United States doesn't offer that anymore, I think. And that's the US problem. Now in Japan, I completely agree with you. Everybody was forced into that box, right? That is to say, everybody is middle class, and then there was even this famous book some 40 years ago where they were self-declared middle class, and being rich wasn't even an aspiration, and that's changing, right? So there are now more rich people. There are now more poor people in Japan as well, but there's still a middle class, and I think that, that strikes me as something that benefits society and policy and polity, and so forth and so on, because it provides a certain stability. And so I completely agree with you that the intractable problem of Japan is that too many people are stuck, right? But I don't think the solution is to unstuck all of them at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I don't want to take you off the rails here, but I did have something that flies to the top of mind for me coming from the States and corporate governance there, which is the kind of recent trend of talking about the B corporation, the what do they call it, the social benefit corporation, and seeing some companies and even some startups start to plan to incorporate that way. Do you have any kind of thoughts about that? Do you think that that's kind of what it might look like here, or?
Yeah, so that's the interesting development in the U.S. right now, is that so many people are fed up with the system that and not only the millennials, where the parents lost everything and they're kind of completely disenchanted with Wall Street and so forth, but also investors and the ESG investors and even BlackRock is speaking, right? And then there are new forms of forming a corporation that take you away from all of this stuff, right? Which I understand the B Corp is, although you may know more about this than I do. But yeah, so creating new ways in which capital can actually escape the short-termism of those big fat guys, right? The Wall Street folks and the Daniel Loebs of this world, is the response, right? So I think the U.S. has taken three responses to the problem. One is there's a political movement to rethink our system of capitalism. The second is the markets, where people are saying, okay, we're going to boycott these bad things. And the third is this emergence of people that really, really do care. And we see this in this new wave of vegetarianism on ethical grounds. We want to change the industry and how cattle is raised and so forth. We see this in investment, that people no longer want to invest in big old oil companies that don't also do renewables, and we see it in the startup guys that really want to make the world a better place. So all of this is, I think, very healthy and very exciting in the United States. It's still pretty small, though.
Yeah, and to your point, and well, new companies, they form their governance around new principles and new beliefs. But also I wonder whether, because we can see that short-termism, is very typical of the large corporations. And so I wondered whether it applies also to some small and middle-sized businesses, and whether, because there we have definitely a different structure, of ownership and shareholding and so on. So, do you think that new small enterprises and middle enterprises could be one of the solutions to short-termism and also value extraction and all the problems you talk about in your article?
So corporate governance only applies to companies that are listed on stock exchanges, right?
But
Because the private founder firms can do what they want,
they
and they don't have the legal requirements to introduce, whatever board of directors and mechanisms and disclosure and transparency. So, I'm trying to figure
sorry, the
out
point is that
where you're headed with this.
because those companies they start small, they become middle-sized, not all of them, of course, but at the end of the day, a portion of them, they go to the stock exchange, right? So and on the way they build their own culture based on their own beliefs. So that's probably one of the ways to
Well,
look at
yeah.
it.
So one way to solve the problem is to have companies not go public.
Okay.
Then there are fewer.
That's
Then
interesting.
there's fewer prey, right? And companies can change the world and make the world a better place. But then they forego the financing mechanisms that a public company enjoys. Another would be to change the law, right? So like Professor Lasnik suggests, let's disallow some of these rapacious moves, and let's make sure that shareholders are honest. Right. So, for instance, there's a proposal on the table that you can only do certain things in governance if you have been a shareholder for at least 6 months or 12 months or something. So you can't just do the quick in and out burger sort of deal. And so there are some movements to change this, but it was interesting for us here, since we're doing Japan. I mean, Japan is not considering those moves, let's say protective moves, if you wish, because the reformers and the young guys and and some half of the guys who run the country are gung ho on putting more short-term pressure on places. And as Sam just said, maybe that's right. Maybe we need more of a critical mass of well-run companies before we can slow it down. But my concern is that financialization is a slippery slope, and that if Japan goes too far down that road and turns a job into a contract that pays, and if it doesn't pay, then I'll find another job sort of thing, it would be difficult to undial that, as we know from the US. So that's why I wrote this little piece, because I thought, well, maybe we should think about this now rather than go all the way down the road to short-termism and tenshoku and dainiji shukatsu, right? So enter the shukatsu immediately after you've been hired out of college. All of those things speak of increase in liquidity. And what is too much liquidity, and what is a sufficient amount? And right now, too many people are stuck. I completely agree with Sam. But I wouldn't want to be a policymaker to decide this, but I think it's worthwhile thinking about it.
Right. So basically, we all have to find a balance, and the question is where the two different trends diverge. So thank you for this. And we have just a few minutes left. If anybody wants to have to ask a question or share their view on this, please come up on stage now, because otherwise, yes, okay, I'm going to turn the hand permissions off. Okay, Ren, hello.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Maya, for letting me in. And thank you, Ulrike. Did I pronounce your name right? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's Ulrike. Thank you.
Thank you for wonderful information. It's been very insightful. And I would like to ask a question about the point that you just mentioned about the employment don't just follow the money or the salary increase. That could be dangerous down the road. I think that's what you said, and I kind of understand. I think I understand what you meant by that. But on the other hand, what I have observed in my industry, in the tech industry, I would like to point out that just a tip of iceberg maybe, but the software engineers in Japan is really paid with a low wage compared to the rest of the world. Even the software engineers in Shenzhen, China, are getting higher salaries than Japanese software engineers. The reason I brought up this issue is, your speech made me think what exactly salary means or the reward is. If we could, for the sake of simplicity, if we could say that if you are contributing more to the society, or if your responsibility has been increased, then you ought to have the right to have a higher salary. And because that, from the software industry's employment point of view, if that logic is a little bit off the balance, then not so many Japanese people will be aspired to become a next software engineers. And that's why Japan may be falling behind in terms of some of the so-called digital transformation and things like that. So it may have a negative impact if you're not incentivizing the people, with the young people, to think of pursuing their careers in a very important part of the Japanese growth as a country. So what would you think? What is your view on incentivizing more, paying more to those software engineers in Japan, because that's a key industry that Japan has to catch up in the world. So that was my question.
So it's a great question, and you're right, of course, right? So, by the way, the United States is now deploring that we have not enough software engineers. So, it's not singular, but in Japan it's a particular case, like
Right.
in the sense it's okay. So, what is salary, right? So you could think about salary as lifetime employment, some sort of function of a lifetime income, and the rewards or penalty to stability, right? And so if you wanted to have a mathematical model, we could drive a little thing there, kind of write it up. And so it differs from person to person. For some people, stability is super important, and they'd be perfectly happy to have a little less income, but a stable job with a pension and that sort of thing. And I think that's actually what is recently becoming possible in Japan, is that the people, the software engineers that are really, really good, that I know, and this is your industry, so true or false, my observation is that the software engineers that are really good are becoming contractors. And they are basically going, they're non-regular workers. They go in at a very high salary, they fix a problem, or they work for a couple of years and then they go to another one. And that route is open and it's growing. It's still small, but it's open and it's growing. So that there is now more, we're at the beginnings of more of a choice. That is, if you're a software engineer, you can choose to join a company and have this highly predictable lifetime income, and you don't have to worry a thing, and that's great. Or you can choose to become an independent contractor and go from gig to gig and make a ton of money. And I think the important change that's happening as we speak is that society used to look down on the second version of job choice, and I think increasingly young folks that make a lot of money by way of being independent contractors are increasing in status in society.
And that's accurate, by the way. That's accurate.
That's true, right?
Yes.
Do you think that's true?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's small, but it's there, right? And so as that gets bigger, then for companies, the big advantage is that, there are lots of advantages to lifetime employment for companies. Turnover is expensive. Usually the morale is better, the teamwork is better, they can keep the wages a little lower, right? So companies actually kind of like some aspects of lifetime employment, just like some people like lifetime employment. And I think the healthy way for Japan to go forward is to just allow choice and to set it up in a way that the large companies can actually afford to keep some lifetime employment, and then also attract talent by giving them some sort of alternative means of employment. So 20 years ago, this conversation would have been very different. I would have agreed with you that it's all horrible and there's no solution in sight. But I think the solution is slowly happening, that the real talent is out there and they know they're good and they demand a very high price tag. And companies like them as contractors because it keeps wage parity intact in-house. And so they just put them on a contract basis. So if you agree with that, that makes me very happy because then I feel like okay.
Yeah, I think I share the same view, and the question is the one farther down the path, because if you are a large corporation, I would think that you want to keep those people in the company. For the longer term projects or a longer view, or maybe those people can become the loyal employees. So if the company, the large corporation in Japan, if they can somehow pay the higher salaries, like some of the Silicon Valley's large companies are paying for those software engineers, then those engineers may be okay to stay within that large corporation and do something even bigger than a contractor from one place to the other, to the next. So I think it's Japan's loss if they cannot keep a stable long-term software projects with highly skilled software engineers, instead of having the software engineers like a single samurai, in the old days, So I think that's actually a disadvantage for Japan to do anything longer term, because if you want to do anything that is big, you need to have a longer term with skilled software engineers, and that's why these GAFA companies are coming to Japan, because the Japanese software large corporation cannot have skilled engineers with a longer term things, which is what I think Sam is trying to help Japan, I guess. But I just think this is a bigger issue that may be worthy of further discussion. Maya.
Yeah, I think that's right, and companies are seeing this, right? And the labor shortage is going to, combined with, by the way, the current pandemic, is going to accelerate these trends. That companies are saying, okay, look, we've got a labor shortage, we've got the digital cliff coming, we've got all of this stuff happening, we've got to do something, we're going to switch to meritocracy and then pay these guys more. And my sense from talking to CEOs is what they're trying to figure out is how they can reward the top talent and keep it and change their work content and take them out of these lockstep promotions and all of these things that hold them back. Do that, and at the same time keep the existing system for the rank and file, who are also important.
Yeah,
right?
But realistically, I don't think Japan is ready for that, though. It's not ready for that yet, though, because...
Interesting.
Thank you, Ulrike. Thank you, Ren. This was Japan Expert Insights Room on Business Insights. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next week on Thursday at 8:30 a.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and enjoy every day as much as possible. See you.